Welcome back to Mastering Change. Today, Dr. Keisha and I are joined by Ashley McGirt, therapist, speaker, and founder of the Washington Therapy Fund Foundation. Ashley shares her work supporting Black and marginalised communities in accessing mental health care and the systemic barriers that still exist. We talk about collective trauma, intergenerational grief, and why healing must include rest, justice, and space to feel. Let's begin. Ashley McGirt, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As most of our listeners know, and in the absence of Araminta and the pleasure of having Dr. Keisha with us today, I will take the cards from Esther Perel's card game, shuffle them up, and ask you a question to get us started today. And that question is: the craziest thing I've ever done for money is ...
The craziest thing I've ever done for money. Um, well, to talk about childhood trauma, as a child was latchkey kid and just pretty much raising ourselves, and me and my sister, we had to sell candy to pay the rent. And anytime I see children like outside selling candy, I always give them money, even if I don't want the candy. And that was probably one of the wildest, crazy things that we had to do to survive, which was sell candy.
Thank you for sharing that with us and starting off with such beautiful vulnerability. We honor that. We honor that.
Thank you.
Really, and just that concept of candy, which to a child should be such, you kind of candy, the idea of like joy and pleasure, but it being ingrained with something, so different for you. It really, that struck me as quite profound. Not only you're having to sell things to kind of be able to survive, but it's that one thing that should kind of embody, well, for kids, it's the thing that I would associate with pleasure and treat. Before we get on to talking about how you relate to this field, would you mind just introducing yourself in your words?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley McGirt. I am a trauma therapist. I'm the CEO and founder of the Therapy Fund Foundation, and I relate to this work through my lived experience. I always like to attribute it to my grandmother's life, who really informs the work that I do. Her life that was cut way too short and has been an inspiration for my own mental health journey and my aspiration to ensure that we're all well.
Talk to us a little bit more about that then, Ashley. What was it about your grandmother's? I mean, that sounds like an incredible legacy, but talk to us about her situation and circumstance that was the catalyst for what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in the 80s during a public health crisis. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, which was murder capital at that time. It had some of the highest crime rates in the entire United States. And my grandmother, she was raising us due to other factors that impacted my mother's life, my father's life, to where they weren't able to actually care for us. And there was a lack of resources that were available to her and to our family. So I think a lot about the way that we're now treating the opioid crisis, and with all of the resources and the support, and had those been applied to the crack epidemic with resources and support versus criminalization, how our lives would have been differed. Instead, what I saw was my grandmother struggle trying to support her grandchildren, trying to support herself, and really resulting toward destructive coping mechanisms. There were liquor stores on every corner, so she could get like cheap access to alcohol as a way to solve her problems. And I often wonder if there were mental health resources, if there was sound, therapeutic, culturally responsive services available, would she still be here today? Ultimately, she is not. She died from a stroke. The leading cause of stroke is stress. And my grandmother was extremely stressed out. And there was just so many failures from the point when she went to the hospital. She was experiencing a brain bleed and they sent her home. And essentially they sent her home to die without resources. And I think a lot about other people in that predicament, other Black folks, wealthy folks, poor folks. Recently, Jamie Foxx, he had a stand-up comedy show called What Had Happened Was, and he talked about the very same thing that happened to my grandmother that happened to him. He's a celebrity, very wealthy person, had a brain bleed, was also sent home essentially to die, but he survived. He had family who was able to advocate for him and get him back in. They gave him a cortisone shot, all of the same things that happened to my grandmother, except she actually didn't go back in. She was found left alone in her home. From the stroke. And then when she was hospitalized, there was just so many failures within the system that I attribute to her race as well as to her socioeconomic status at that time. So that's why I say it's the inspiration around my work, because again, while therapy can't save everyone, but I do often wonder how her life would have changed if she had a therapist that she could go to, someone that she could talk to, aside from like resulting to alcoholism, and being isolated, not having an outlet to be able to share the things that were going on internally, to process everything within the environment that was happening during that time within the 90s, and looking at the result of all of the systemic issues and the crack epidemic, the that is now recognized as a public health crisis today, but was not seen as that back then. Um, so yeah, just again looking at that, who she went to for support, who she wasn't able to receive for support. And so that is why I really want folks to be well, to have access to sound coachly responsive clinicians, why I created a therapy fund foundation that provides free therapy services to Black community members and other communities who have been historically excluded. That is something that is really important for me, and it also impacted my own well-being growing up. After that, when my grandmother passed, I went through a series of moves and ended up leaving that environment, which was predominantly Black, to going to a predominantly white neighborhood, and was experiencing grief that turned into major depression. And I ended up seeing the school counselor who didn't understand the role of grandmother in Black families. And I was 9 years old having to educate this woman on race relations in America. And it took much longer for me to get the healing and the support and the care that I needed, because I had to spend that time explaining my culture and also taking on shame and guilt that wasn't mine. And I learned that as I became an adult, there were certain responses that the clinician had that made me think I was at fault for my experiences, the way that my mother was, my father was, and I just remember the gas, the ahs, like, "Oh my gosh." And then you see that as a child and it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I shouldn't be telling this story. And so I kept things internally for a very long time because of the way that the reactions were from the counselor that I saw, that created a level of shame and guilt. That I never carried until I saw her facial expressions and was like, maybe this is something I shouldn't be talking about.
When you mention culturally responsive therapy and then you share, these powerful illustrations, I think it really opens up an opportunity to inform our audience and also further spread your message on how you have taken these life-changing experiences and these failures that come with systemic oppression to dedicate, your professional career to advocating for these issues. So I guess my follow-up question to you would be, of the work that you're doing, what are you most proud of?
Gosh, I there's so many things, because I get to have the pleasure of seeing the difference that I make in the lives of people. I was just recently at a festival and a young child came up to me and was like, you let me know that I could talk about my depression and that it was okay and that I saw myself through you. I have couples who tell me, like, you saved my marriage. And so I'll probably say the Therapy Fund Foundation, and that's probably one of my greatest accomplishments in being able to provide free therapy to people who would never access it before, and letting them know that there are clinicians who are doing the work, because it's so still heavily stigmatized within our communities, and there's a fear. And when people see me out in community and they see the clinicians that I work with and our team, then they reach out and they're like, maybe I can try this thing. Or even if it's not going to our therapist, we also have peer supports, and even just reaching out to our peer support services. You don't have to have all these letters and degrees to be able to provide healing work. And so when I look at the babies, and that just makes a profound difference in my life, because I was the baby who did not get the help that I needed. So when they come up to me and they give me hugs and they thank me and just tell their stories out loud, I think that is the biggest thing for me.
And in terms of healing work, because that's such a powerful thing in such a tumultuous time of uncertainty, from your experience, what are some areas of healing work that we should be thinking about, whether it be from the culturally responsive lens, whether it be from the systemic failure of not being there to support people who should be supported? It was so visceral when you painted the picture of being a 9-year-old having to explain. I know that feeling. I've done it in the States and I've done it abroad. And it is the tax. I think you use the language, the cost of color, in your notes. And so I really just want to give you space to speak to what might be bubbling up inside of you as we think about healing work, because it is so important that we not only understand that you don't need fancy degrees, you need trust and an ability to convey care.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I just want to give you the floor to speak to what might be coming forward as you share these profound insights.
Yeah, and for me, I always think about the healers who we don't acknowledge because
Mhm.
they don't have the degrees. I think about the barbers, the hairstylists.
The grandmother
Yes, the grandma's my
is
grandmother.
one.
I can keep a picture with her
Oh,
next to my
the
bird.
chair. It's the
Yes.
family chair. It gets no more authentic. I'm sorry, audience. You don't see this, but there is a symbolic chair.
It is.
So that's
Yes.
all right
You
there.
know it. You know it. So this, yes, the grandmas, the big mamas. My grandma was a little tiny thing, but she embodied that big mama spirit, and
Mm.
what that did, and the spirit that still carries me, and really just paying homage to them for laying the foundation for this work, and how we get care. Because even as I go out in communities, there are still folks, even people in my own family, who will not see a therapist. They're like, I'm gonna just go get my hair done. And that is the work that I'm going to do. We also have like a program where we provide mental health first aid training to barbers and stylists, because they do take on a lot of vicarious trauma in doing this work. But just being able to spread the word that it comes in many different forms, and there's no one size fits all. It's, what is going to get you through the day? What does that look like? How do you rest? How do you show up authentically in yourself? And for me, as a Black woman who carries the lineage and the ancestry of someone whose ancestors did not get to rest, I love my naps. I love to take my breaks.
Oh,
My husband jokes, and he'd be like, they've named them Ashley naps, because I just love to rest and take my breaks and ease into my body and not feel rushed. And doing this work, doing this healing work, sometimes people will want to rush and pressure you into things because there's always crisis happening in the world, gun violence, protest, all of these different things that are happening, and people will call on you to respond, to have an answer, to show up. And sometimes, you're just still trying to get out of bed yourself. And so, really honoring my body and what that looks like and how I can show up and pour from my overflow and not be depleted. Because my grandmother, whose life was cut short, she poured until there was nothing left, and she gave and she gave and she gave, and it killed her.
Yeah.
And I do not want to die an early death. And there's just a legacy of people within my family who have left this world too early, and other Black folks. I did hospice therapy for a number of years, and I served two different communities. So I served Vashon Island, which is a very wealthy white community. Um, and then I would get off the ferry boat and go to Skyway, a neighborhood in Seattle, which is
Mhm.
predominantly Black and brown and poor. The
Mhm.
people in Vashon were living well into their hundreds. The people
Mm.
in Skyway would be on hospice care in their 50s. My very last hospice patient was a 23-year-old Black woman dying from chronic stress related illness, which could really be attributed to racism. And when I look at the things in which the people of Skyway were even dying from, and the people in Vashon, two different life outcomes.
Mhm.
And, it's not okay. And so that's why I do this work, because I want us to live long, fulfilling lives. I had a 104-year-old white woman that I had to discharge because she was not showing signs of actively dying. And in order to be on hospice, you have to be actively dying. And so, again, just what does that look like to be able to live in your hundreds, to have to be dying in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s? Two different outcomes.
Can you help me unpick in the context of therapists? Because a lot of our audience are therapists, practitioners. You talk about that kind of cultural attunement because in order to democratize therapy, you want a full pool of therapists who are able to respond appropriately in an tuned way. Are there principles there that can be taught, practices that can be embedded to make sure that the experience you had, which brought up shame and guilt, is something that can be mitigated in the future? Because what I'm hearing is that you're here to advocate for access to therapeutic interventions as widely and systemically as you can in order for the benefit of those interventions to be felt in, you know, life and quality and quantity of life. So it was sat here when you were saying that thinking, I'm sure like Keisha and I talk about being well intentioned, straight and well intentioned, white and well intentioned. What does it look like then to kind of lean into that appropriately?
It looks like doing your own work, chucking your biases, doing some anti-racist training, reading, not putting the work on the person who's in front of you. I know there was a big push that started around the 1980s to be culturally competent, and then we all had these mandatory culturally competent courses, but no person can be fully competent in another person's culture. I'm a Black woman. I've been a Black woman my entire life, and I'm still unpacking what that means for me. So it wouldn't be possible for someone else to show up and be, have all the profound language and understanding of Blackness and what it means, as well as all the other layers, womanness, queerness, all the other intersectionalities that we can add. But just being humble and getting to a space and maybe even recognizing where issues may present themselves that you don't have the skills or the tools and you have to refer out, and being okay and not too prideful to where you're going to try and work this out or ask 1,000 different questions. And it's okay to ask questions, but what I experienced in my session was constant education of a 9-year-old having to explain race relations in America to a person who had not read a book, who had not done their own work or had any understanding. I often wonder if I was probably the only Black person integrated into their life. It was also a predominantly white community. So if you don't leave outside of your community, you're not going to meet other people. I travel all around the world. I meet different people. And I also understand there is a privilege in that it's costly, it's expensive, all of the things. But you can go, a few blocks outside of your neighborhood. You don't have to hop on a plane and you could still meet other people. Um, I shared that I split my time between Seattle and San Diego, but I'm from Seattle and I was born in Tacoma, which is 45 minutes away. And there are people in Seattle who will not go to Tacoma. And it's like a whole nother country over there, the way that they're treated and it's just a 45-minute drive. And it's vastly different environments. And also there is still the stigma associated with that community from the 90s when there was a lot of crime. They've completely re-gutted that community and it looks different, it feels different. So it's not the Tacoma that it was in the 90s. It's also been heavily gentrified. So it's also no longer a predominantly Black community within that neighborhood. But there are still people like, Tacoma? What? No, absolutely. And it's like, how are you going to get to know the people of the community, the people that are still within your same state, the resources, the culture, if you're refusing to go outside your little square box of where you live? So I think that's important. Reading books, watching films with people who look different than you, going to a library. I know library funding has been cut significantly, but we still have access to that. If you have access to the internet, there's things that you can find and work that you can do. There's a lot of free resources. It doesn't have to be costly. And again, it's just being willing to expand your horizons and expand who you're communicating with, who you're eating with, who you're dining with, who are your children hanging with? Is it a diverse community? Because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. And I think that is important, especially in this field, that we expose ourselves to other cultures.
I mean, when you were talking earlier about your grandmother's situation and then subsequently your experience, it just kept coming back to compassion and respect. And they were the things that just seemed to be so lacking in the context of, you were talking about the how addiction was viewed then versus how, we've seen it as a public health thing, and the importance of those two principles. And then also a curiosity, I think, that you're describing there. It's a curiosity that everyone can foster with their children and the next generations coming through. But it's a lifelong. It's like the learning, but it's like curiosity and learning. There is no finish line. There is no finish line with that. It should always be evolving. And you described a very expansive way of doing it. But I agree. There's you don't have to go far to be able to live, and we've got the benefit here of having been such a melting pot in the UK of cultures that kind of convene and converge. You really don't have to go far to do that. So thanks for sharing that, because that was a question that had burning from the start. How do we do that then? Because we don't want it to be that there's only that everybody can't offer that therapeutic intervention, in an appropriate way.
I had a follow-up question, if I may, Ashley, because there's so much similarities in how we both positioned ourselves within mental health. And when these questions are asked, and you gave pretty much the all-encompassing answer of, start where you are, look outside of yourself, and understand that you have far more resources than you think. My question is on the opposite side of the coin for people who are dealing with the cost of color, for people who are in bodies that are dealing with racial trauma. I find that they very rarely know how to take space, how to speak up for themselves, how to say no. particularly when there are power dynamics. And I think your illustration of when you did hospice care is such a profound example, because I think about Dr. Geronimus's work around weathering. This is what it looks like. Or to cite Dr. Gabor Mati, when the body says no, right? So where I feel um, I'd like you to speak to for our audience that is in bodies of color, helping them recognize when they need to put up that boundary, when they need to say no, what it looks like for them to protect themselves from the weathering of constantly having to deal with all of these aggressions, whether it be in informing someone else or simply living.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't talk enough about that. And,
Mm.
there's really been no guide to tell us when do we stop, when do we say no. And I feel like people of color, Black folks especially, we've always had to say yes. So I start with paying attention to the body and doing a head to toe assessment. And how does your head feel? How does your neck feel? How do your shoulders feel? Are they real tight? Like releasing that. So literally just starting there, and what is your body giving off?
Yeah.
I love to do progressive muscle relaxation and just tightening, releasing that, tightening, releasing that. I have a high bed, and so before my feet even hit the ground, I'll start from my feet to my calves, to my
Mhm.
thighs, to my glutes, and I'm just like raising off the bed. So before I even touch the ground, I'm doing that because I know that my body carries an intense amount of trauma that's been passed down from bloodline to bloodline, and what that looks like in the healing work. And I love play. So my cousin, I'm gonna get deeply personal. My cousin passed away last month, and I already shared growing up in a public health crisis and being impacted by the crack epidemic. So our families were split apart.
Mm.
My aunt had, I want to say seven, eight, one of my aunts had seven, eight children, and they all were taken away um, from the system. And we met each other as adults.
Mhm.
Some of us grew up together with my grandmother. And so with my cousin passing last month, all of the first cousins came together, and we went to the playground, and we were outside my sister's home, and there's a playground there, and we're in our 30s, 40s, and we're playing at a playground, going down slides, doing the
Having
monkey
a great time.
bars.
Yep.
And that was so healing to the
Yep.
body, to the mind, to the spirit,
Mhm.
because we're able to recreate what the 90s robbed from us, and
Exactly.
not being able to go down the slide together. Like, my arms was burning the day after, not gonna hold you. I had no business doing the monkey bars at this big age, but it was just so profound. And like,
The reclaiming of that.
yes. And
Celebrate you
so
all for reclaiming that.
yes, so I say that to say get back to play, because
Mm.
what that did for us, no therapy session could do. And gosh, I can't even articulate it into words what that did, but getting your body back to that play state, back to that soft state, and recreating things that maybe your body never experienced, because that was something we had never got to do collectively as a family, was all play together as cousins, and we did that last month, and it's so beautiful. And just the way that like our bodies were sore after a lot of us, but just still the way that our bodies like was able to just rest and let loose and be at peace around one another. So I think that's important, to allow your body to play, allow your body to rest, allow your body to relax, because so many of us are walking around like in heightened states, just
Yep.
tight, release the jaws, all of
Yes.
those things. And we have to be, because we have to be on guard and bracing ourselves for what's next. And that takes a toll on us, and it impacts our lifespan. So again, just leaning on what the body needs, and then going, okay, what does the mind need? who do I feel good around? Picking your phone up. Who are the last 5 people who text you, the last 5 people who called you? How did you feel when you saw their name on your phone? Was it like, oh God, here we go again? Or was it like, light? Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait. My 7-year-old niece calls me like every 10 minutes. She would be calling right now, but she's in school. And when I see her face light up, as much as she calls me, it just brings me so much joy. So I know that I love those conversations with my niece. I know that there are people who just bring me immense joy and calm. And there's also people I know, like, okay, they're going to be asking for something. That's one more thing. Preparing myself. And, we live in a tech savvy world to where we can put do not disturb on our phone. You can put restrictions on who's able to call within a time frame, what that looks like. And I think it's important to utilize those functions if you do have a smartphone, if you do have certain devices.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't like to wake up with a cell phone. I have an external alarm clock so that I'm not waking up to notifications and ask and news and things that you never know what's going to be on the top of your phone. So I still utilize an old school external alarm clock. I also have to physically get out of my bed to turn it off. And then that just helps me get up and I can go into my grounding practices. Listening to Tony Jones affirmations and just, or
Mhm.
gospel songs, Marvin Sapp, things that make me feel good to
Mhm.
start my day. And that's important. And then giving myself grace for the times when I do fall asleep with my phone next to me and then I'm waking up and I'm like, whoa, what are all these alerts? What's happening? Because we're human and it still happens, but I think that's important. There's so many books on boundaries as well that can be really helpful as well for a person who needs help setting those boundaries, saying no. Um, Paying attention to the body, somatic practices, all of those different things, and just practicing out loud that sacred no.
Yeah.
I had to do it a lot last month with my cousin passing. It was also Mental Health Awareness Month. So one of my busiest seasons. I was booked to speak at a conference literally the day of my cousin's funeral. And
Mm.
so that I was really practicing the no and setting boundaries and what
Right.
that looks like. And people were not happy and they're gonna be okay and they're gonna survive. But I have to make sure I'm well. And there was one event, there was like 7 different requests on one day. And I showed up to 2 things and I got to make slime with my niece after. And in the past, I would have showed up to all 7 of those events trying to be all things to all people, and I would have
That
missed the opportunity to make slime with my niece.
Great. So many incredible reminders, suggestions, like for anybody listening actually, on what it takes to look after ourselves in the world that we're living in. I mean, we were talking to somebody the other day and it was just they're saying there's no way we could have evolved in the last 50 years to respond, or 100 years, to the environment that we're living in now and the changes that have happened. You could call that the last 200 years. There's absolutely no way that our bodies could have caught up. And so we have to be, it's like we're living on Mars and we have to kind of find the right conditions to kind of thrive as opposed to survive, which, really does stick with me. And everything that you've talked about is lots of ways that you can protect and encourage, a favorable way of being. If it's okay, I'm going to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast guests. And unfortunately, it is going to take us right out to that macro geopolitical landscape that we find ourselves in. Because if we look right out there, whether it's climate crisis or the politics that are affecting the world, if we zoom in and look at what's happening at kind of a society level or a community level, what might have been the case that would have held us together 50 years ago looks quite different, or what didn't hold us together. These lots changing, is very dynamic. And then you look at relationships with friends and colleagues and significant others and families and siblings and our relationship with ourselves. And there's lots of reasons for those to become fractured. tormented, hard, difficult, challenging, all of these, I don't really probably need to use any more words, because all I get when I ask this question is just abstract nods of kind of understanding and relating to this situation in which we live in. If there was a single lever for change, a button that you could push that would be the catalyst for the kind of change that we need to see, what would that be?
Ooh, a single button for the catalyst of change. I would start with healing and wellness and be like, Oprah, you get a therapist, you get a therapist, you get a therapist. And so that one button, which is what I'm already doing, is through providing free therapy, would be starting with healing and wellness. I want us all to be well and reclaim our birthright of true wellness. So that would be the button, starting there, because how different would this world be if we all woke up without depression, anxiety, any other mental health stressor that we're dealing with, and went off into this world. So that would be the button. I would start there so that we could all be well.
Mm.
That would be great. That would be great. Thank you. That's a great answer. I really appreciate the generosity with your time today, but also your insight in the conversation. I never tire of these conversations, and today's just been one of those exemplars of best practice for me. So thank you, Ashley.
Same. I have
Yeah.
always enjoyed our conversations. When I saw your name, I immediately remembered you, and I see why. You are unforgettable, very powerful presence.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good seeing you both, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.